Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Ethereum, comparing the bear markets. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, we put out a video just a couple days ago or so where we talked about Ethereum and where it generally heads to during a bear market. And what you'll see is that, when you have these logarithmic regression bands for Bitcoin and Ethereum, we know that they tend to make their way back to those levels when we are in fact in those bear markets. And when you look at this chart for Ethereum and the logarithmic regression band, remember in 2018 we did eventually make it back, right? It took a while. The downtrend started in January of 2018, and we made it to the regression band by the end of the year, right? It took about 12 months or so. Now, what's interesting is when you actually compare these bear markets, when you overlay them, okay? Now, one thing we could do is we could overlay it just in TradingView, but better yet, we'll just go over to, again, this is the intothecryptoverse.com. You can toggle for Ethereum market cycle peak ROI, meaning what is the ROI from the peak in the bear market. Okay, I mean, this isn't really the way people normally think about ROI. They don't really usually think about it in terms of measuring it as it goes down, but I think it is useful in helping people to exercise patience and to really see the market for what it is, and to really just continue to accept that we are in a bear market if you still have not accepted it yet, and to look to see how far along are we potentially in said bear market. Okay, so it's just something to consider. Now, one thing I've seen, and it's certainly not lost to me, is a lot of people say, well, this time is different because the macro looks pretty bad. And while there are elements of truth to that, and we could see further downside than we have seen, or I do think Ethereum will ultimately see further downside compared to where we currently are. But you should also, from one perspective, you should look at this and say, yes, the macro looks worse, but even if it didn't look worse, we're still not even at an ROI from the peak comparable to the last bear market. Okay, so just to put it in perspective. So with all that in mind, what some of the things we do know from a macro perspective, at least things that we can at least point to in the past, is that, remember, the S&P doesn't typically bottom until inflation peaks. And since Bitcoin is just more or less a riskier asset than equities at this point, and it is more volatile in both directions, to the upside and the downside, then it would suggest that Ethereum is likely just going to be an even more volatile version of Bitcoin, right? So it gives better gains typically in a bull market, but it also provides more difficult losses in a bear market. And one of the ways to even visualize that is already Ethereum from its peak has already gone down 80%. Bitcoin has only gone down about 75% or so. Okay, now you might not really think that's a big difference, the difference between, say, 75 and 80%, but these percentages do, they do in fact contribute a significant amount. Bitcoin's already about 75% down when it went to 17.5K, but for it to go to, say, 80% down, you're talking all the way between $13,000 to $14,000. Which is a fairly significant drop. Bitcoin from the low would have to drop another 25% to get there. And from the current price of around 20K, it would need to drop around another 33% or so to get to that level. So Ethereum has certainly dropped quite a bit harder than Bitcoin so far during this bear market. And my guess is that it will likely continue to do so. All right. Now, again, if you just look at the ROI of Ethereum as measured from its market cycle peak, and you compare this bear market, which is the orange line here, to the last bear market, there's not a lot that's different. There's not a lot. One of the things that is different is that it isn't quite as bad, right? So even though the macro is worse, right? Even though the macro is worse, arguably Ethereum is a much more developed product now than it used to be, and it's holding up just a bit better, right? Let's not get too carried away. It's not like it's holding up that much better, but as a function of time, you can see that it has been more or less holding up just a bit better than it did last market cycle. Now, one thing you should we should point out is that it was actually at this point during the last market cycle that Ethereum, in fact, saw another leg down. Okay, so if we were to sort of pinpoint this on the Ethereum chart, so I'll pull out the Ether chart. And we know that basically, if you sort of think about this is the initial pull, the initial drop, sort of a dead cat bounce right here, a dead cat bounce right here, and then a move to the downside, a move to the downside. I believe that if Ethereum were to see another move down right here, okay, and sort of repeat what it did over here as we got into the third quarter of 2018, and then sort of level out a little bit as you get closer to the end of it, something like this. What that could look like is Bitcoin staying relatively flat around 20K and everything else, including Ethereum, taking a nosedive in the short term. Okay, that's what it would look like if, in fact, we were to continue sort of this trend right here. All right, so be on the lookout for that. Remember, every bear market is slightly different. You can see over here the last cycle went down, this one went up for a little while, but ultimately they more or less reached the same level. And so in terms of time, as measured from the top, the technical top, Ethereum, I mean, you can see it's around 232 days or so into this bear market, as measured from the top in late 2021. But we also know that last cycle, it actually took closer to, say, 340 days or so before the bear market for Ethereum was, in fact, over. Okay, so you're potentially talking about another 100 days or maybe even 120 days or something, 3 to 4 months of continued price action to the downside, plus or minus a couple months, right? I mean, it's hard to know these things exactly, but again, when we look at these bear markets, we don't assume they'll play out in the exact same way, but they do provide some perspective as to where we potentially are, what we could expect without necessarily changing what we saw last cycle, albeit with a different macroeconomic conditions, but just trying to provide some perspective on where we are so that you can hopefully better navigate the cryptoverse. And to remember that, the next Bitcoin halving is not until 2024, right? And Ethereum does tend to outperform Bitcoin as measured from the market cycle bottom. However, it also underperforms Bitcoin typically as measured from the peak to the bottom. Okay, so this is something I think it's really worthwhile to consider, and it's likely going to continue playing out for many more months to come. So I do want you to just sort of digest this chart, maybe just pause the video, look at the chart. Again, don't take it up with me, take it up with data. I just want to present to you the data and to say, look at this chart compared to where we were in 2018. And I very much lived the 2018 bear market. And I'll tell you, I started buying, altcoins and Ethereum and whatnot about 4 months too soon, basically at this plateau right here. That's where I started buying. And, I was not really expecting this to happen. Okay, so I think patience is a virtue. I also think that given everything going on in the macro landscape, it's just even more reason to remain cautious and to remain defensive, during these times, and to not fall for the idea that the pump is around every corner, right? I mean, we're going to have relief rallies. I don't think anyone's doubting that. We'll likely have a relief rally at some point. But with that said, the relief rally over here in 2018, at least when you look at the Heikin-Ashi candles, we didn't really see a sustained move until after the bottom was in, right? I mean, like, you could argue that we're in this phase right now, right? Like, we're in this phase. So if this is the phase that we're in, the relief rally that everyone's waiting for, it might not come until the bottom is actually in, right? Like, I know that seems kind of crazy. It might not come until the bottom's actually in. And it could still be months away, right? So I think it is something to consider. I do think there's a lot of people constantly waiting for a pump so that they can sell into it. The problem is that when everyone's waiting for a pump, who's the buyer, right? Who's buying? Who's actually buying? And if we do see some type of relief rally, which again, I mean, I suppose is a big if, it'll be interesting to see if how long can it be sustained for. My guess is even if it is sustained for a few weeks, it'll probably be relatively weak. and that we'll need to build out, another base of support, just like we did over here in 2019. I mean, that's the truth, right? I mean, after all the things that have gone on in the macro landscape, after everything going on, even in the cryptoverse, and major, companies really struggling right now to stay alive, a lot of people have lost faith in the crypto market. And unfortunately, the faith in crypto typically during a bear market is not restored through the lens or through the means of, say, like a V-shaped recovery. It's restored through something more that looks like this, right? Where you ultimately put in a bottom and then you consolidate for potentially a year. Okay, so you need to be aware of something like this happening, and recognizing that, again, the next Bitcoin halving is not until 2024. And we're only halfway through 2022. Now, I know it seems like an eternity to get to 2024, but realistically, the bottom tends to occur before the halving, right? Not only for Bitcoin, but also for Ethereum. And last cycle, the bottom occurred about a year and a half before the halving. So, I do think, while I would assume that the Ethereum USD bottom is not yet in, once it is in, it doesn't mean that it's immediately going to skyrocket. What you'll likely have is some type of long consolidation where we potentially go down. Let's suppose we make it to the regression band, right? And you consolidate around there for a while, and then eventually you gear up for the next bull market. But I do think that sort of overlaying the Ethereum bear market with the prior bear market is probably helpful to someone. And so maybe just look at this chart and try to figure out what the investors from the last market cycle experienced, and how, it was just pain. It was 1 month after another of pain in the, for the Ethereum valuation. And one thing I think to potentially look out for is if Bitcoin, gets somewhat stuck around the $20,000 level, plus or minus a few K, as we're continuing to look at fairly bad macro conditions, you could of course see the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation continue to deteriorate, which is what I think is the most likely path for the Ether Bitcoin valuation, for the remainder of the year. So I know this isn't always the best news, but we have to keep it. We have to just stick with the data, even if it's not what we want to hear. And just remember, I mean, despite the comparisons we make, we know that various bear markets will be different from one another. Nothing's going to be the exact same thing. Of course, this is not financial advice. I just want people to have sort of a grasp on the market as to what is theoretically possible, not what you want to happen, just because of what it may or may not mean for your portfolio. If you guys like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. You'll get access to this chart as well as a lot of other charts, including logarithmic regression, risk, market capitalization charts, ROI charts, all these moving averages, on-chain charts, including supply charts, addresses charts, evaluation charts. And I mean, a lot of this stuff you can actually get for Ethereum as well. I know a lot of places might only have it for Bitcoin, but I mean, if you just simply go look at things like the MBRV Z-score, which a lot of people are probably familiar with for Bitcoin, you can also see what it looks like for Ethereum as well, or other cryptocurrencies, and then hopefully use that to try to better figure out, are we in that accumulation phase that people are waiting for, or do we need to wait a bit longer? Okay, so again, if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.